In this video, we talk about how in the past developers were able to employ transparency in video games. They're talking about games in the 80s and early 90s. In fact, the alpha era, in quotation, really started in the mid-90s. Before that, the hardware was too weak to calculate the math for every single transparent pixel. For example, the SNES in 1990, it had a feature called color math. It wasn't true alpha blending, where you can actually again decide if you want 50% opacity, 10% opacity, and so on. It basically just added or subtracted colors. So this allowed for ghost effects or transparent pipes, but it was very limited. The Sega Saturn, for example, from 1994, it's famous for struggling with alpha. It most relied on the mesh dithering trick, which I'm going to show you here in this video how it actually worked. So it could do transparency, but it was computationally expensive, so developers usually chose the mesh instead. The PlayStation 1 from 1994, this was the first major console to make extensive use of hardware semi-transparency. It allowed for smooth transparent explosions, fog, and glass, which blew people's mind away compared to, of course, Saturn's screen door effect. In 1996, we had the Nintendo 64, which had advanced alpha blending hardware. It blended edges so smoothly that it actually contributed to the console reputation for having blurry graphics. Dithering is kind of a technique when a system couldn't display, for example, enough color. So instead of showing, for example, solid color, it doesn't have, like for example, a true 50% gray, the computer creates a pattern of alternating pixels, like a checkerboard of, for example, black and white. And then because the pixels are so small, or because again the screen is slightly blurry like a CRT, your eyes blend the two colors together. So this trick allows you to see basically a new color, or a smooth gradient, or transparency, or just smooth out jagged edges. Now let me give you a very clear example. You can see here, this is a kind of close-up of a game running on the Sega Master System. Now you can see yellow color, right? These blob circles that are yellow. Now what color will you see when I'm going to zoom in? Let's check it out. So you can see when we get closer, you can see that the colors aren't actually yellow. To create yellow, the screen lights up the red and green phosphors of subpixels, depends of course, in this case this is the Trinitron, at the same intensity. Your brain actually interprets this color as yellow. So in CRT, there isn't kind of a yellow color. It's just a pure trick that uses of additive light in order to create this effect and give you the illusion that you see a yellow color. So if you go back, you see it turns into yellow. You can see the transition where your mind just can't tell, right? If you go even a bit more back, you can see that even you can see, of course, the red and green, it just becomes yellow. The same technique was used to show transparency. I'm going to show you exactly how in a moment. So you can see Sonic here on LCD, and if you use a shader, it kind of mimics a CRT. You can see suddenly, you can see kind of transparent. You can see Sonic behind a waterfall, right? And actually the segments there are actually less, more transparent. I mean, they're less water there, shown much better when you look at it on a CRT or 1D employed dithering. So this is how when you create, for example, a game, you create colors that don't exist. You just mix and match with red, green, and blue, and also with different intensity to create something new, a new color. Now this is very obvious when you see especially Sonic and the waterfall effect. It's very significant if you just see something on an LCD compared to how you see it more close when you observe it on a CRT. But to demonstrate it better, let me show you a simpler example. Alright, so let's look at this ghost. You can see this kind of checkerboard pattern. Let's take a look closer. There are going to be some artifacts because of the large enlargement, but you can see kind of checkbox, right? You can see white in the background, right? In this case, like blue and the white of the ghost. Now, of course, it works better on a CRT display because on CRT, a pixel is an electron beam hitting a phosphor coating. There is bloom, there is signal bleeding, and as you can see here, if I kind of try to blur it, kind of mimic what you see in CRT, you can see the effect is much more effective. Also, by the way, for drawing more kind of realistic shadows. So this was common for CRTs. Of course, some CRTs have, for example, stronger bloom than others and less bloom than others, but overall, there was something that is more in common. The developers, when they developed the game, they took this into account. And if you're using shaders with your, for example, LCD or OLED display in order to mimic it, those shaders actually employed dithering techniques in order to replicate this effect. So that imperfection was actually a feature the developer relied on to turn a harsh mesh into a smooth transparency. You can see it here very clearly, and it's very effective even in this very simple example. Of course, it also depends on the game, on the scene, right? And other aspects like the cable that you have and the CRT screen that you have, or if you have PVM or BVM. Nothing in this is just pixel perfect because there are so many things that are taken into account here. But back in the days, people weren't using, like consumers were using like professional displays or using very high quality cables. So developers were actually aiming this to creating this transparency and of course other effects to basically something that is most common for CRT displays. This is why if you want the more authentic gameplay experience, you want to either use a shader if you're playing on your modern display, or use a CRT that will just give this effect by default. But it also depends which CRT. And if you want something more authentic, you just basically go with something that developers will use with consumer CRTs rather than professional, and also cables that not necessarily produce the sharpest image. Like for example, cables like composite or RF, radio frequency, they smear the color signal horizontally. So they physically blend the checkerboard pattern into a solid color before it even hits your eyes. And that's how transparency was done well back in the days. I hope you found this one useful. If so, make sure to subscribe to my channel. More interesting videos are coming. See you in the next guide. Cheers.